Welcome to AUSA's Army Matters podcast, focusing on what's important to the total Army community. We bring vital Army conversations and interviews on issues relevant to soldiers, military families, and all of you amazing Army supporters. Rotating each week, our show includes Soldier Today, Army Real Talk, Family Voices, and Thought Leaders. Let's tune into the show.
Welcome to AUSA's Army Matters podcast. This is Thought Leaders with Joe Craig. My guests today are Jonathan Klug and Leonard, editors of To Boldly Go, Leadership, Strategy, and Conflict in the 21st Century and Beyond. Jonathan Klug is a professor at the U.S. Army War College, a military strategist and historian. He's a PhD candidate in military and naval history at the University of New Brunswick, and he's an award-winning military history instructor who's taught at both Air Force and Naval academies. Leonard is an award-winning faculty member at the University of Kansas, where he chairs graduate programs in organizational leadership and supply chain management. A senior fellow at the Modern War Institute at West Point, he's the author, co-author, or editor of 5 books, and he's a prolific military cartoonist. John, Steve, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having us, Joe.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Well, first, let me just begin by saying how much fun this was to read. I love To Boldly Go. I'm a longtime sci-fi geek myself, so it was great to see how the book uses science fiction to explore issues of strategy and leadership. And I love how it's perfect for browsing with short pieces from over 24 writers. So, Steve, maybe you could tell us, how did you decide to come together on this project, and how did you select the contributors?
Oh, so that's a great question. So the genesis of this project dates back to about 2018, where Mick Ryan and I were sharing a dinner at West Point during a Modern War Institute event. And he kind of threw the idea out that, hey, maybe the two of us could do this. And, you kind of look at that and say, well, that's a lot. I don't have the bandwidth to write a whole book myself, certainly not in any short period of time. So how about we look at, maybe doing an anthology, which he and I had both done previous anthologies. We've been involved in Strategy Strikes Back and Winning Westeros, which were Modern War Institute projects that predated To Boldly Go. And that was a great way to do it. We thought, hey, let's start to pull this together, see what happens. And so we started to reach out for contributors, and we kind of targeted some very specific folks. We pulled in some writers that had been involved in our previous anthology efforts. John and I were bouncing back ideas for how we would do this. And John was a natural inclusion in the project because, like I said before we started, John and I we've had an ongoing relationship for 20 years that, we collaborate on things, we share great ideas, and this was a great idea. But one of the things that we really wanted to do with this was make sure that we had a really good balance of writers. And we really wanted to have a good balance of a good mix of gender in here. So have at least half of the writers be women, since, half of the population is women. So it just seems like having a good representative sample is probably a good goal to have. And literally, we just started to reach out to people. We started with some of the folks that helped on those previous anthologies. And from there, we started tapping into people that we knew were either into the genre or were just really exceptional writers. There's even a couple of people that contributed that don't have a background in science fiction, and their immediate response was, oh, yeah, I can't write about it. I don't watch Star Wars. I've never seen Star Trek. It's like, don't worry about it. You're going to binge watch over the holidays, and then we're going to catch up. And I won't name any single contributor, but it worked. And the results, you saw the results yourself. If you couldn't tell that there were people that had never seen, read, or experienced science fiction in that group of contributors, if you couldn't tell that, then we were successful. But that, in a nutshell, is kind of how we threw this whole thing together.
Right. As you say, it certainly does not show in the final result. And I kind of envy those folks who got the chance to do the binge watching, because I know it's certainly inspired me to do so. So, John, let me turn to you for a moment. And ask, why is science fiction such a good teaching tool for the military?
Well, I think it allows people to tap into their imagination, and that in and of itself, I think, gets people excited, and I think people learn so much more and so much more effectively when they're really interested in a subject. And if you can if you can tap into imagination, and you can tie in to some of the things that they enjoy away from work, it just is so much more effective, so much more fun. Science fiction is such a broad genre, and it explores so many aspects, and so many science fiction shows involve military and leadership concerns, strategic concerns. So it just really becomes natural. And to kind of tie back into the first question, we wanted to make every one of those chapters, have something for everyone. I may not be familiar with Old Man's War, but I'm very familiar with Dune, and people are like that. So it can tap into something that you're familiar with, tap into something maybe you're nostalgic for. Like, I enjoyed Dune, read it a long time ago, watched the one in the 80s, watched the recent one, but that just makes it so much easier to get excited about, which makes teaching so much easier.
Well, that's fantastic. And, just kind of flesh that out, using sci-fi as a teaching tool. Maybe we could take a case example of the piece that you worked together on. Can you walk us through the lessons to be found in Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan? Maybe you start with you, John.
I think fundamentally it comes down to the notion of the experience versus the intelligence. Khan's brilliant. We all know that if you've seen any of the old Star Trek or the Wrath of Khan itself, he's obviously brilliant. He's genetically engineered to be superior in so many ways, et cetera, et cetera. But in the original television series, he spends a lot of time looking at different things in the Enterprise's computer and becomes intimately familiar with the systems and so forth. But this only goes so far. He doesn't have an experienced crew. From everyone from those down in the engine room to different parts of the ship to the actual crew in the command center, if you will, of the Reliant. And not only that, but it's just him. A chapter on toxic leadership, which we could discuss later, where Khan is kind of a exemplar of toxic leadership. But you contrast this with Kirk. Kirk's crew is a Starfleet crew, so they're used to operating. They understand the systems. I mean, granted, they're trainees on the Enterprise at this time, but when you look at the actual immediate staff for Kirk, this is another aspect of the experience. So I always like to bring up, Napoleon as an example. He was a military genius, brilliant, intelligent, in some ways like Khan, but he's also experienced. Now, when you talk about the Napoleonic Wars, one of the things that Napoleon's enemies did was they created a general staff to try to, through multiple people, bring that same level of excellence. So rather than relying on one person, one genius, you tap into the strength of a group of people who are used to working together. So that's a huge plus on Kirk's side. He doesn't have to just rely on himself. He's taking advice, especially from Spock, the whole Z minus 10,000 meters point. Steve?
Right.
Oh, and that's a terrific point to note, that the interplay between the crew of the Enterprise and the crew of the Reliant. It's not just the leader; it's the people around them. And if you watch that set piece fight, it's Spock, it's Chekhov, it's Sulu, it's even McCoy. They're all involved and they're all advising and they're helping Kirk, fight that fight. Then you juxtapose that with the Reliant, and it is Khan forcing his way to do things his way, forcing the crew to fight the only way he sees how to fight, and he becomes predictable and defeatable as a result. And so that's something that's a lot of times is lost in the retelling of that battle, is that it's not just the leader, it's the crew, and experience underscores everything that happens.
Did you know, as a member of AUSA, you have access to many benefits? From car rental to entertainment discounts, the opportunities are ample. Visit www.ausa.org/benefits to learn more.
All right. Well, in addition to the leadership lessons and the value of crews and experience, I'd like to talk about the timeliness of science fiction. We got science fiction, like fiction in general, it usually reflects the issues of the day. For example, Steve, Planet of the Apes you mentioned as an allegory for civil rights. And then you have some books that can be reinterpreted in light of later events, like Stephen King's The Stand. What is it that makes a good science fiction story timeless?
Sometimes it's just the timeliness. Timelessness. I think that with science fiction, it tends to, because it's speculative, even though it's rooted in the issues of the day, because it's speculative, it kind of rides a wave into the future. So it's relevant until it's not relevant. You look at Asimov and the whole robot novels, and as we look at emergent artificial intelligence and the ethics behind artificial intelligence, it just keeps bubbling to the surface. How do you ensure that ethical conduct and behavior is present there? And all of a sudden, then you have people talking about the 3 laws of robotics, and how Asimov built in ethical behavior into the robot novels, 50, 60 years ago. And it's still relevant today. It's a hot topic of discussion, and it probably always will be. The Stand was a great subject, and I like to point The Stand out. And Craig and Steve Whiteside, who wrote that chapter, this was written pre-pandemic. So the fact that they wrote a chapter about a pandemic and then drew lessons from that pandemic in the chapter, and then what happens? COVID hits. And it just made that chapter all the more relevant as we went through editing, because we didn't see it coming. The world didn't see this coming. And then you have this chapter that is absolutely timeless in its arrival. You couldn't ask for anything better than that. And it was just a fluke, but you want to talk about a great fluke. I'm thankful that chapter was in the book. And there's other chapters too. You take Max Brooks's chapter and how he uses the Romulan Wars and the use of the Remans by the Romulans to tell a story of, for example, the Tuskegee Airmen after World War II, and their return to the United States and their expectations to be treated equally, and at least as well as they should be treated, considering the sacrifices they made. But yet you tell that story, but you tell it through science fiction. And so it gives you a kind of a safe space to consider the ideas, while you can really sit down and talk about those ideas, but you're doing it within the context of a fictional universe.
Right. And John, one of the other timeless themes that we see that's mentioned again and again throughout the book is the idea of rebellion. Why do you think rebellion is so popular in sci-fi, and what lessons should we take from it, the next time the U.S. actually faces a counterinsurgency?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. You kind of have 2 major parts there. Why is in science fiction, is it just great storytelling? When someone is rebelling against the evil overlords, you can pick your genre and explore that. Is there something in that just to good storytelling? Is there a part of that about the birth of our nation? I'm not 100% sure why it is so popular. Why space operas, as sometimes they're called, like Star Wars. Why is it? Why are they the rebels? Why is that? Why do we come to it? It could be just storytelling, but to go towards the counterinsurgency and insurgency side, we've grappled with this for the past 20 years, and science fiction very often reflects current issues, whether they're social, as we've kind of talked about, or in this case, the conflict side of things. If you look at the early 2000s version of Battlestar Galactica, a lot of people point towards that as a large allusion to the global war on terror. I think it fundamentally just goes back to science fiction allows us to explore strategic problems, strategic concerns in a way that taps again into our imagination. It lets us explore things, explore it through a story. So when I looked at insurgency, I looked at Dune as far as the Fremen, and looked at Star Wars, looking at the Alliance side, and then even Battlestar Galactica, looking at a little bit at both sides, which is interesting. If I'd been able to do any more, 3 was enough for that one chapter, but if I'd done more, I'd often thought about trying to explore Flash Gordon for those of us who remember the classic 80s movie.
Right. And kind of a related idea to that, the way that these rebels succeed, it's often in the face of, overwhelming technology. And so we get this common theme in the book that, technology matters, but people matter more. So, Steve, I was wondering, what can sci-fi teach us about the value of, say, training and doctrine?
Oh, wow. That is a wild question. Let me tell you. If you've had any experience with the Tradoc Mad Scientist project, they've done really well with that, and they've used science fiction and fiction in general as a foundation to explore ideas that kind of fuel that exploration. You look at the training piece of that, the development of individuals, of teams. Doctrine doesn't come up quite as often as training does, for probably obvious reasons. But we kind of looked at that too. Even in the book, there's a chapter in there that uses Starship Troopers and the development of characters in that show, that movie, and in the book that deal with over time how you grow capability at the individual or at the team level, and they explore training just through that lens of Starship Troopers, because really the whole movie is about the development of Rico and everybody that surrounds him and what they do. He grows from being just this, just basically a goofy high school kid to, a proficient war fighter, fighting the alien bugs. And all that's done through training and experience and development. And, so when I look at the Mad Scientist Project, that's been a great platform to use science fiction to explore the issues that are central to training and doctrine command.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly lots of examples of people developing, tactics and techniques on the fly, and one of the chapters talks about, the costly lessons, the blood lessons that's, perhaps can be ameliorated by the use of fic-int, by using fiction. But gentlemen, there's been a fantastic conversation. It certainly can go on much longer, but do you want to wrap up with things? Maybe 2 quick questions for you each to close this out. One, if you could add 1 book to the military's reading list, which one would it be and why? And then 2, a short one but very important, Star Wars or Star Trek? So maybe, John, you go first.
I think if I had to recommend one book, that's always a real challenge, but I'm going to stick with one that I've kind of come to use lately, and that's probably The Expanse. The first couple books especially, because when we talk about science fiction and we talk about space, of course, space and cyber being things that we've been focusing on learning about trying to get ready. I think The Expanse does a great job about handling what conflict in space would probably look like. I mean, before they get any kind of crazy alien technology or anything, but when we're talking about real Newtonian physics, the way that we see things right now, I think The Expanse would be my recommendation.
How about you, Steve?
For me, there's actually two different things that I've recommended. For a straight-up science fiction book, I will always go with the Foundation series. As a strategist, the Foundation series by Asimov always represented the idea that you see the forest and you don't get lost with the trees. And the whole focus of that series is seeing a future that can be hundreds, if not thousands of years away, but keeping your eye on that future and not losing it, which is really what strategy is all about, staying focused on the vision and the conditions that you want to establish and not getting lost in the here and now. But I also recommend a different book, which is, again, fiction, and it's totally off the wall, but I recommend it as a reading list book because it's great for how to tell a story, and that was Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan of the Apes. I actually listed that in a Modern War Institute publication for one of my top 5 reads, and it was my number 1 read because I learned how to write by reading Edgar Rice Burroughs, and just his ability to tell a story and convey that story in a vivid picture. So as you read, you can see everything, you can smell everything, you can taste things. It's so realistic and so alive that's how you tell a story. And I would definitely add that to a reading list too.
All right. Well, I'll pin you guys down on the Star Wars versus Star Trek at another time, perhaps. But, gentlemen, I want to thank you both for being our guests. And listeners, their new book is To Boldly Go, Leadership, Strategy, and Conflict in the 21st Century and Beyond. So, gentlemen, live long and prosper.
Thank you so much.
Be with you, Joe.
And to all our listeners, thanks for joining. Keep it locked here for all Army Matters and for next week's episode. Have a great Army Day.
To all our listeners, thanks for joining us. Be sure to subscribe to the Army Matters podcast on iTunes and everywhere podcasts are found. The Army Matters podcast series is brought to you by the Association of the United States Army, the U.S. Army's professional association, member-supported, Army-connected. Visit us at AUSA.org for more information or to become a member. Your membership helps AUSA continue to carry out its mission to educate, inform, and connect with the total Army, our industry partners, and our supporters of a strong national defense. For questions or to provide topic recommendations, email us at podcast@ausa.org. Have a great Army Day. Hua.